Are journalists and politicians abandoning the public? In Chapter 8, through a discussion of the relationship between journalists, politicians, and the public, Terrace argues that there is a decline in the quality of information received by the public as a result of outdated systems of politics and reporting. Through staged encounters and tightly scripted messages, politicians control the media agenda by irresistibly packaging stories. Terrace acknowledges that Canadian political parties and leaders tend to be disengaged and avoid the watchful eye of the media and public. While Terrace makes some valid points, we argue that the future of the public sphere is not as grim as he would have us believe. There are bright spots on the horizon to continue to build public, political, and journalistic engagement. But there are several key issues that need to be addressed first. Journalistic responsibility. Terrace argues that the degree to which journalists are now connected to those they cover is tantamount to journalistic malpractice. Examples include the media underreporting the climate that led to the financial crisis in 2008. Terrace argues that journalists are now so close to the sources they miss the story. He claims that in order for journalists to have access to CEOs, politicians, and other elites, they have to run positive stories about them. In addition, journalists are now taking a for and against format without providing the critical analysis or information needed by readers and viewers to discern the real facts. The for and against format has become so deeply embedded in journalistic routines that reporters will drop stories if they can't find subjects that support opposite positions. He argues that the role of journalists should be to capture the shades of gray that are not always visible in presenting complex issues, even if these issues don't have clearly divisible sides. Horse race journalism. Terrace uses the term horse race journalism to describe how journalists see politicians as competitors vying to win hearts and votes, rather than seeing them as people serving the public by trying to set the best policies. With the media so interested in winning, losing, and sensationalism, Terrace contends that governments have begun to avoid using the media to get their stories out. Instead, they limit the number of spokespeople and script them with messages to better control and frame the story to their advantage. The lack of in-depth news coverage, transparency on political issues, and the tendency to view politics as a horse race results in citizens being acutely unaware of what is happening in their country. And while this system was initially set up in the hopes of producing the exact opposite result, it is time to acknowledge that it is not working properly. Lack of detail and content in political reporting. Terrace laments the demise of political reporting. Christopher Waddell, a former parliamentary bureau chief for CBC TV News, holds the budget cuts and reduction in Ottawa bureaus by major news outlets responsible. Fewer bureaus dedicated to politics mean there are more generalists in journalism who lack the depth and time to conduct investigative work and establish expertise and relationships. Journalists argue that they are so overwhelmed by the increased demands of reporting on multimedia platforms on a constant basis, such as Twitter, blogging, preparing for television live shots, fielding calls and emails, that it has restricted their ability to be critical and dig deep into issues that are hidden between party messages. Terrace explains that media coverage can be so inadequate that even those following stories can misunderstand the issues at hand. However, there is the tendency for viewers who don't actively follow news, and even those who do, to blame the media for lack of coverage when it becomes obvious they haven't been made aware of significant issues taking place in their communities or around the world. As Terrace states, ultimately, much of this becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. The lack of engagement produced by various factors has created the conditions that have allowed news organizations and political parties to disengage from public debate. The science of politics. The science of identifying supporters, getting them to donate, volunteer, and go to the polls has become a key to electoral success. Canadian political parties rely heavily on databases. Terrace argues that the danger in allowing politics to be reduced to a series of databases and algorithms is that there is the temptation to make your supporters happy rather than proposing what is good for the country. Those who don't vote, the poor, the uneducated, younger voters, can be ignored. In addition, while political parties historically have been ideologically based, today more and more policies are publicly packaged based on politics where party platforms, strategies, and campaigns are drawn from opinion polls and focus groups. The effect of polling on politicians when they are campaigning is that they are reluctant to make clear statements or decisions for fear of the impact on the polls and the resulting coverage. Moreover, the phenomena such as online polls, vote traffic, ballot selfies, etc., media has been complicit by turning politics into a spectacle. Rather than focusing on informed debate and challenging established views, thus allowing the public to make informed decisions, contemporary media has merely acted as a conduit for information. Noting how harmful this behavior can be, Tim Cook suggests that newsmaking is now a central way for governmental actors to accomplish political and policy goals. In short, rather than acting as a critical observer and reporter for the public's issues, contemporary media has morphed into an entertainment-focused machine that helps placate the so-called peekaboo citizen on behalf of the government. Elections and campaigns. With the advent of the 24-hour news cycle, there is no longer a campaign off-season. We live in a hyper-accelerated news cycle with stories sometimes appearing and fading in hours and minutes. To respond to the latest controversies or opposition attacks, talking points, designated spokespeople, and compelling images are prepared on a constant basis. Most of political communications are highly scripted, where political leaders have a well-sharpened message of the day, and they repeat the same one-liners, the same phrases, and the same sound bites over and over again until reporters have no choice but to go with the intended message. On each stage, politicians only provide the messages they want the media to cover. News conferences are becoming rarer than in the past due to the lack of ability to exert the type of control demanded by political platforms. Question period is seen as an organized diversion from directly answering questions. Scrums are similar to question period, in which leaders come prepared with their message of the day, including a battery of one-liners, and attempt to stay on message despite attempts by journalists to get more information and quickly exit once their message has been delivered. One-on-one interviews are rare and are typically given to reporters with friendly coverage, thus allowing for the positioning the conversation in a favorable direction. Leaders tours, once an opportunity to assess the leader firsthand, are now, like all messages, entirely scripted for television and other media, and have become backdrops for choreographed images. One major exception to message control is during election campaigns, where party leaders are required to participate in televised debate. The typically controlled narratives can be challenged, and due to the widely publicized nature of debates, top runners may dip in the polls depending on how skilled they are in rhetoric. Debates are comparison shopping at its best. And looking back to the first televised U.S. presidential debate in 1960, it helped sway public opinion, and Kennedy won against his contender Nixon. Are the most authentic way voters get to know their political party leaders, since they allow for a more personal, vulnerable feel of personalities, and politicians have the ability to reach across the screen and connect with viewers. The live airtime lets people gain a more comprehensive understanding beyond the sound bites of leaders' opinions on issues, and demonstrates how quickly they are able to think on their feet. In addition, digital technology gives Canadians the opportunity to re-watch and analyze debates on YouTube and other news sites, which becomes especially disadvantaged for weaker performers. Political advertising. Another characteristic of the permanent campaign is the use of pre-writ advertising designed to demonize opponents long before the election is called. These strategies continue throughout the campaign periods and have become common political Canadian practice. Despite the popular fiction that Canadians have different attitudes to attack ads than Americans, nothing could be farther from the truth. While this strategy can be effective, there are numerous examples that show the pros and cons of this approach. It was highly effective in sabotaging Ignatieff's 2011 election campaign. However, it did not have the same effect on Justin Trudeau's 2015 campaign. Terrace quotes Jonathan Rose's review of Canadian election ads that found that attack ads all too often raise issues that were irrelevant to the campaign and were about invented policy differences that didn't really exist. Impact of the digital world. The emergence of web-based media has created additional pressures with the need to daily and hourly refresh websites, email campaigns, YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook. Terrace concludes digital technology has merely helped political operatives to respond to only those questions or parts of questions they wish to answer, and enables disengagement and avoidance. In addition, there is an enormous fear of party leaders' staffers posting the wrong tweet, to the point where the rules of communicating online are surprisingly similar to the ways in which parties communicate through the traditional media: control the message, avoid interaction with the public, and go negative. Hence, broadcast tweets, one-way messages about an event or news item, have become the norm, and interactive tweets occur less than 20% of the time. This is due to the permanent nature of emails and tweets and the possibility of an online statement which could create the equivalence of a viral forest fire that will be impossible to contain. Today, the public uses digital communications to entertain and distract themselves from important issues, including what their politicians are doing and how government functions. What digital media has been doing is meeting what the public wants rather than what they need. As Zuckerman discussed in Rewired, Digital Cosmopolitans in the Age of Connection, the internet makes us feel we are all digital cosmopolitans, but in truth we are not. And while liking an important and political post on Facebook might make us feel good, it doesn't make us citizens contributing in a public forum to our own democratic nation. The results. Terrace warns that citizens will withdraw from public life as a result of the tug-of-war facade between politicians and journalists. In just a few short years, this has already become alarmingly obvious. Terrace notes that about 1/3 of the population is currently newsless, and that in just 10 years, the number of Canadians who are satisfied with the state of democracy dropped 20 points. While journalists can argue they are doing their best in a broken system, the average viewer doesn't see the complicated nature of the issue. Positive signs. However, there may be signs that the era of avoidance is changing. Newly elected Prime Minister Justin Trudeau invited 10 ordinary Canadians to ask him questions on topics affecting their lives, which were then publicly answered by him. Admittedly, Trudeau was able to prepare himself. However, his willingness to be on TV for an hour for a non-campaign occasion is a shift in public engagement by a Canadian Prime Minister. On a provincial level, Calgary's Mayor Naheed Nenshi has gained worldwide fame for his hands-on political approach. From retweeting local news on lost dogs to engaging in open online discussions with opponents, Mayor Nenshi has managed to keep a high level of support, which arguably has helped him win a second term in office. He continues to interact with the public and not end the conversation like so many of the federal politicians have chosen to do. Conclusion. Terrace paints a grim view of the future of the public sphere, blaming the state of the news and the way politics function. He further argues that rather than reporting the news objectively, the media has made a habit to spin politicians' words and actions to benefit their own agenda and to gain readership. He also claims contemporary media has adopted an if it bleeds, it leads mentality to attract and maintain the public's diminishing attention span. While at first glance this may ring true, the public has enjoyed a symbiotic relationship with the media, driving its change and vice versa. Ignoring how this relationship has affected the state of contemporary society is unwise. Citizens are not completely off the hook. In Republic 2.0, another book discussing politics and the public, Sunstein discusses the underlying effort that is required of citizens to ensure a democratic society is functioning properly. If the public is taking this task seriously seems unlikely when Terrace presents the statistic that 80% of people never discuss news or politics online. While others, like Sunstein and Zuckerman, have shown we tend to only connect with people online who share our own views, this information takes it a step further to suggest that perhaps people aren't talking about important issues even with people who agree with them. Now the question remains, what can the public do? Stay vigilant. Call for independent news outlets such as the CBC to stay independent, ask questions not only from their politicians but also from their media, ask where their loyalties lie and make them accountable. An attentive public is crucial not only to the functioning of democracy but also to the survival of the news media itself. Ultimately, only the public can police those they have appointed to look after their interests.